Hello and welcome to our first podcast, which concerns the splendid work being done by Heritage Lincolnshire. I'm Robbie Deadows and have been a volunteer with HL for the past 12 years. Heritage Lincolnshire has been particularly successful in conserving and reusing historic buildings. The latest building preservation project is Greyfriars in Lincoln. During this podcast series, we're going to give you a fascinating insight into Greyfriars. This is going to include the history of the building itself and some of the characters who've been linked with it over the centuries. We're also going to be looking at the plans that Heritage Lincolnshire have for it and how it may be used in the future. This is going to involve talking to a number of experts from Heritage Links and beyond. First of these is going to be Kathryn Moore. Now then, Kathryn, how are you doing? How are you? Are you well?
Yeah, not too bad. Still find it strange working from home, but getting used to it.
I'm getting used to it. It's taken me several years since retirement to get used to being at home, but it's nice in many ways, but difficult in others. Right, your official title, I gather, is Heritage at Risk Solutions Officer. Can you just explain what that means to us?
Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful. We've got Historic England to thank for it, as they part-funded my post when I first started at Heritage Lincolnshire. And the aim of the role was to look at, as it says, heritage at risk. So those are historic buildings, quite often they're designated buildings, so listed, that have, through poor repair, often problems with ownership over the years, become in jeopardy. So they're either at risk of physical loss, or they may be at risk of being sold off to someone who's not going to look after them very well. And my job was to help, initially to help communities and local authorities and at times private owners of historic buildings that were at risk start projects on them or get projects moving on them so that we can basically ideally take them off an at-risk register, but just get them a bit more secure was the idea.
I make this, number 6? I think the original one was Mill Hill, a little steeping. Then we have Bridge Street in Horncastle, St John's Workhouse in Boston, and the last two, which I've sort of been involved in a little bit, 116 High Street, Boston, and of course the King's Head in Curtin. So Greyfriars is now the latest one.
At our heart, Heritage Lincolnshire, we're what we call a Building Preservation Trust. So you just picked up on there on quite a few of the buildings that we've looked at over the years. And sometimes we are helping other people with their buildings, but we always try to have a building that we're focusing on. And Greyfriars was on the hit list that came through from Historic England, and had been on our radar a bit anyway, because we were aware of it. And for those who don't know about Greyfriars up in Lincoln, it used to be, its last use was as the county museum. Before that closed and it moved up to the purpose-built site in the collection just slightly further up the hill. And since then, the building hasn't had any kind of permanent use in it. It's sometimes been used for arts events, and so is gradually getting into a poor state. Now, Greyfriars is a really important building, as well as being Grade 1 listed, which means it's internationally important. It's a scheduled monument as well. So it has kind of the highest level of designation and protection of any building that we have in this country. And it was in real need of a new use, but because it's so important, changing it is something that has to be done really carefully and really sensitively. One of the things that we're really aware of with historic buildings is that usually the death knell in their coffin is when they're not used. Because if they're not used, we're not bringing in income to be able to maintain them and keep them in good repair. We don't have people caring about the buildings, which help people kind of encourage us to keep places in good repair as well. And people just aren't engaging in them. And that's a real loss, I think, to people's connection with their local environment. So with Greyfriars, very much the focus is going to be a really sensitive repair of all of the external envelope. The roof, there's a lot of work to do on the roof. But then it's going to be integrating a new heritage attraction downstairs in a really light touch way. So we're talking about using holographic imagery, sound and smell, replica objects, costume. I think dress up is very important, not just for children in heritage sites. And then upstairs, so we've just got 2 big rooms in Greyfriars, really, the vaulted undercroft that a lot of people may have seen on photos. And then upstairs, we've got a very, very large room, which we're looking at putting back an historic subdivision in, just to give us some back of house space and storage, all those things that you forget about for these places. But then also a very large venue upstairs for up to 120 people, where we can do conferencing and events and temporary exhibition as well.
I was knocked out by the building. We were there on the open day back in 2019, and it was just a fantastic building. But it's also, but what I mentioned to you before, the fact that it's very close to the library. I mean, there are issues about that, but there's also certain advantages to that as well in terms of, actually using it.
We're really keen to work with lots of local partners. That's very, very important to us. The library have been incredibly supportive of what we want to do, and we're already talking to them a lot about ways that we can work together. And similarly, we're talking to people like the Heritage Service at Lincolnshire County Council, who obviously have some of the big heritage attractions in Lincoln already, about ways in which we can work together. It's a site that we want what we offer there to be really special and renowned, and people to come from far and wide to visit it because of the stories we're telling. But we also want those stories to be really rooted in Lincoln and Lincolnshire.
I think the public are certainly with you. It's on that open day, I was amazed how many people coming into the building who we showed round were actually reminiscing about being around the building when it was a museum, and they were walking around the bottom bit, around the vaulted arches, and they were saying, "Oh yes, last time we were in here, there was a big model of this there and a big model of that there." They loved it.
This is what I'd love us to see us do, if possible, with this site. It was a museum for almost 100 years, and if we can have a new use which can last at least as long as that, and get as many people as enthused and excited about it and sharing those memories about it again, then I think we'd have done something brilliant.
Thanks for that, Kathryn. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from you in the future as you keep us up to date with the project. I'd now like to introduce you to someone who knows a great deal about Greyfriars. Phil, when you and I met on the open day last year, it was obvious that there's a tremendous history to this building, not just the building itself, but also to the people who've used it over the centuries. Can you just take us along the timeline for the building and give us some sort of flavour of the building itself?
Yeah, I can do that. I think of all the research projects I've done, this is one of the most interesting projects. It's just unbelievable. And the key reason for that, if you ever go into Greyfriars, you literally walk through history. You work from a period going back to the Greyfriars period, which goes back to something like 1230. That's the year, not PM. And it goes through periods like a school, a technical school, mechanical institute, and finally coming into a museum. So if we very quickly go through that timeline, from about 1230 to 1532, we had the Greyfriars franchise. And then it moved on, and for a period of time the Monsoons took over. They were a Lincoln-based family who actually went forward and brought this whole environment into a school. And they moved on to a house of correction. And this terminology could be a jail, it could be a place where they used to put vagabonds and things like this at a particular time. And that's around about 1612. At the same time, the school was there, and the house of correction disappeared because rules, etc., changed. The school was spinning and knitting. And this was a worldwide enterprise where predominantly men at that particular time trained to be knitters and actually spinning, so forth and so on. And they actually had a remit of very hats they had to make by government decree. And because of mechanical things moving forward, that actually closed down because it became more a mechanical type of an activity. And then we moved on again. The school is still going on in the background, and we had the Mechanics Institute. And this was more a technical environment that local men, again, would be using. And it could be, for example, somewhere where they can go and read books, or they can actually have a technical environment. And of course, the local community and the businesses were very keen on this as well. This became an institute again throughout the UK. And that moved on. And there came a period of time, though, that the school itself had to grow. So basically, the Mechanics Institute was kicked out, and they went to a local period for a period of time before they disappeared altogether. And this Mechanics Institute was ingrained, and there were quite a lot of famous people that actually came from Lincoln and went on to become great mathematicians, for example. But probably a period of time, up to about 1900, it disappeared. But now came a period of time when probably locally more people knew about the Greyfriars. It became a museum, and it was very widely known as both an institute, and some of the open days we've had, people have come in just to be in there and to be in where this museum was. They used to say it was quite scary, but I never actually saw it, but it must have been an amazing place.
I remember on that open day, several of the people we spoke to had actually come back to revisit it, and they remembered it from the museum days, and they were talking about some of the exhibits inside the big exhibition cases, But there must have been about 4 or 5 people who actually referred to that. So it's certainly an amazing building with a fantastic history. Thank you for that, Phil. No doubt we'll hear a lot more from you in podcasts to come, and you can put a bit of flesh on the bones there for us. Thank you very much. Having heard from Kathryn and Phil, I'm now going to hand over proceedings to Alex, another Heritage volunteer. Historical records and archaeology enable us to find out a great deal about the past, but the wonders of modern technology can be a great help in making sense of this. Alex is going to be talking to Mark from Lincoln University.
I'm here with Mark Gardiner from the University of Lincoln today. My name's Alex. I'm currently studying a Masters at the University of York in building conservation, but I'm originally from Lincoln, which is why I wanted to get involved with the project. So, hi Mark, if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Mark Gardiner, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Lincoln. I'm by background an archaeologist, but one of my roles in the University of Lincoln is as director of Lincoln Conservation, which is a very broad conservation practice. So we do all sorts of things from architectural paint research, but one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is digital heritage, and we work with laser scanning. We work with laser scanning buildings, for example, and laser scanning objects. And because I'm also a buildings archaeologist, I'm particularly interested in the application of laser scanning to recording buildings.
That's brilliant, thank you very much. So building on that, so you are laser scanning at Greyfriars for Heritage Lincolnshire. So what sort of is laser scanning and how can it help at Greyfriars?
Well, the real advantage of laser scanning is that it's a way of recording very precisely and fairly quickly all the dimensions of a building. So in the past, when I first started, if you wanted to record a wall face or you wanted to record a plan, you got out your tapes and you had a drawing board and you drew every stone and so on. And it was a very long and very laborious business. It took a long time. Laser scanning, immediately takes away all that. And it does it much more precisely than we were ever able to do with hand methods. So what you've got is essentially a scanner which is set up on a tripod, and it sends out what's called a point cloud, a sort of cloud of laser points, which is they're transmitted from a rotating mirror. So it records all the way around. everything around. You can set it to just look at the building, or usually you set it to look at the whole surroundings because it helps with the alignment of the scans. And it records a series of points very, very precisely, so, within millimetres. And in addition to that, you take photographs. And what in effect it does is it drapes those photographs over a digital surface. So it's like sort of impressing something onto a digital surface. So you've got an absolute direct picture of a wall, or you can look at a building. Now, the advantage in Greyfriars, Greyfriars is a little bit complicated because it's a long, thin building. So a laser scanner only can record what it can see in front of you. So what you have to do is you have to set the scanner up in a whole series of positions opposite the building or opposite the wall of the building. You work your way along, and then you digitally join afterwards. You digitally join those scans together. So the computer says, well, I recognise that window, I've seen that window in another scan. I can put those scans together in some sort of relationship. So there's a certain amount of post-scanning processing which goes on. Now, what do you end up with? Well, you end up with something which is really useful. What we're particularly interested in at Greyfriars is two things. First of all, you can create a model of the building, in other words, digital model. So it's like something you can rotate and you can turn upside down and you can look at from any direction at all. But so that's one of the things that we're going to produce for Heritage Lincolnshire. The other thing that we are particularly concerned about is to produce for the architects and the people who are going to work on this building orthophotos. Now, an orthophoto is different from a normal photograph because a normal photograph sort of creates sort of optical effect at the edges where the edges are sort of slightly more distant. An orthophotograph is like a photograph which is like a plan or a map. So if you measure the distance between one stone and another stone on an orthophoto, that is what it would be like in real life. So we can produce orthophotos of the wall elevations. So it's a marvellous tool, and we can do this relatively simply.
That's great that you can do it simply, and I must say I did a bit of buildings recording in my first year as an archaeology undergraduate, and it was a very long day of recording masonry walls at a parish church in Yorkshire, so it's great that you can do it so, like you say, relatively simply with the lasers. With Greyfriars, will you be focusing sort of on the interior or exterior or both?
We're doing both, actually. We're going to do the exterior, and then we're going to take it inside, and we're going to do the interior. And you can actually join those points up. And what you have to do is you have to scan your way in, so that the laser scanner is both looking outwards and inwards, and it can connect up the interior faces and the exterior faces together. Now, there are always problems because you can't scan through a window because glass refracts and reflects the laser light. So that's always poses a little problem. So you actually have to go through a clear space through a doorway. And the more doorways that you can get, and there's only one in Greyfriars for the basement, the more doorways you can get, the more precisely you can connect the inside and outer faces. But we've done that before, and it works quite well with buildings. And so we are going to produce elevations of both the undercroft, the ground floor of the building at Greyfriars in the interior, and then go up and do the first floor. The undercroft's a bit difficult because you've got all sorts of different faces. It's got these stone ribs of vaulting which support the first floor. And because you've got lots of little faces which you can't see from any one position, it would be quite a complicated job to actually set up the scanner in lots and lots of different positions so you can see every different face of the wall. But we're not going to do that because essentially the task at Greyfriars is to record on the interior, is to record the wall faces. So we're not going to worry too much about the vaulting, and on the first floor we're not too worried about the roof, although the roof is very, very interesting because it is a medieval roof.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So it's great that you're doing the inside and the exterior. I was wondering, because the whole Greyfriars project is orientated around sort of a sensory experience, they want to get actors in, as we're allowed to with restrictions, etc. So I was wondering, how conducive is the laser scanning to aiding sort of spatial and sensory analysis?
Well, once you've got this digital model of the Greyfriars, there are all sorts of possibilities, places that you can take it, things that you can do with it. So at a very, very simple level, you can take a model of a building and you can put it on the web. So there's a website called Sketchfab, and you can reduce the size of your digital record, put it on Sketchfab, and then people can come and look at it, look at the building, look at either the interior or the exterior of the building, and they can see what it's like. And those pictures, those digital models, can be embedded in a website. So it's a way of, bringing people into the building. But there are all sorts of other possibilities of what you can do once you have this digital model. You can use it for augmented reality or virtual reality. But that's another stage beyond the sort of thing that we're doing. But it's a possibility. It's a thing that you can do perhaps for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an extremely exciting prospect, mapping sort of the interpretive side with what you're doing. And I know there's a lot of sort of expert volunteers who are very familiar with Greyfriars, so I'm sure it'll be great for them to see it at home on their screens, like you say, on Sketchfab and websites like that.
A building such as Greyfriars has got a long history, not just of when it was put up, but also as modified in the Middle Ages. It's then been modified a number of times since for all its various uses as a school, and as a museum latterly. So it's got this history of changes to the fabric which have been made. And the only way that you can unpick that history is really by a very, very detailed analysis of the fabric. And this is really a sort of important first stage, because Greyfriars is a complicated building. Indeed, it's quite a controversial building, what exactly it was used for. So, if we don't ever solve these problems, it's really by this very, very careful analysis of the buildings. And I'll just say one other thing, because I haven't really talked a little bit about one of the things that laser scanning can do, because once you've created a digital model, you can do all sorts of really fun things with it. For example, you can slice through the building, digitally, not in reality. So you can just take a cross-section across the building or along the length of the building. So it's not just elevations. You can do it in the interior. You can cut through the building. It's the sort of things that one can do is sort of almost limited by one's imagination, because once you've got this digital model, well, how do you want to cut it up? How do you want to slice it? Do you want to slice it horizontally? Do you want to slice it vertically? And so on. So there are all sorts of really fantastic possibilities, which, you talked about your experience, hand drawing stones. Well, this takes it to another level, because suddenly you've got this tool which allows you to record absolutely precisely, to within millimetre accuracy, buildings in a way which you and I, wouldn't think of doing, because we'd have to hand draw it. So it's a very, very exciting tool, really.
Well, yes, admittedly, my first time drawings of the stones probably were relatively inaccurate. So it's great that we can get that degree of accuracy with it. And like you say, the means of what we can do with it is incredible. So I think that just about comes to the end of this podcast, Mark. Thank you very much. And hopefully we can maybe get you back after we've done the laser scanning and talk further about its uses.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Well, there we are. Thank you for joining us for this first podcast. We hope you found it both interesting and informative, and we hope you're going to join us again in the future. The whole aim of these podcasts is to keep you up to date with the project and to tell you more about this amazing building, its great history, and also the people involved with it. It's worth stressing at this point that this project could not go ahead without the fantastic support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. This is not the first time that this fund has supported Heritage Lincolnshire. A Big thank you to all National Lottery players who have continued to support our heritage projects. We hope you will become winners in the financial sense too.